those of you born with disabilities, those who've acquired as a consequence of the environment or accidents, disabilities, or disease. You're not somebody else's children. You're all our children. You're the kite strings upon which our national ambitions are literally lifted aloft. And the measure of how we deal with your aspirations, your possibilities, seems to me to be the single best measure of who we are as a nation. And so I'm prepared and anxious to talk to you. I want to hear from you about everything from what I would do in terms of appointing judges who understand the literal meaning of the equality, all men are created equal, to the kind of judges I would appoint, to what kind of Justice Department I would have as your president, to what I would do about dealing and explaining to the American people that what we're about in this room is not only morally right, constitutionally required, but practically in the interest of the vast majority of Americans from a moral as well as economic standpoint. The degree to which we educate all those to the degree to which they are educable is not only the right thing to do. We don't talk about it in these terms. It is economically, politically sound. It physically and economically makes us stronger. The idea that we say we value families and institutionalize 500,000 people, many of whom, if we had a different attitude and a practical attitude about reimbursing family members who provided for this care, where else, if possible, is it better for a person with a disability to be than in the environment, if possible, of those that love him or her and would care for and nurture them, had they the economic wherewithal to do so? What are we doing? What are we doing? I'm serious. This is not rocket science. This is not rocket science. This is the intersection. Tony Coelho was one of the great leaders in the United States Congress. Tony, remember our buddy Lawton Chiles. Senator Chiles, later Governor Chiles, and I came to the Senate 2 years apart. He in 1970 and me in 72, and we sat up in the peanut gallery section of the Senate, the upper left-hand corner if you're looking from the gallery. And one day a minuscule amendment passed. It didn't matter much, and he was really excited. And I thought I was missing something. I turned to him, I said, Lawton, what's the big deal? He said, Joe, it's so seldom in American politics. When conscience and convenience cross paths, you should celebrate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what we're about here is both conscience and convenience. Every single thing each of us have supported, from ADA to fair housing to all the access programs, they're not only the right thing from the perspective of conscience, they're the right thing from the perspective of convenience for the nation. There are millions upon millions of families affected. Every disabled person, their dilemma and their opportunity has a ripple effect through this society that's far beyond what we ever pay attention to outside this room. So, folks, let me get right to it. I would suggest to you that we have an opportunity to do something we haven't been able to do in this administration and arguably haven't done sufficiently even in the last couple administrations. And that is, we have an opportunity to take a significant leap forward in America's commitment to itself, its values, and to the disabled community. And it comes out of a tragedy. The tragedy is the war in Iraq. We are going to be bringing home thousands, a minimum of 14,500 so far, of seriously disabled people. Traumatic brain injury, traumatic stress disorder, more amputees per capita in this war than any war since the Civil War. And the nation's focus, if I have anything to do with it, is going to be intensely shined upon that population. This is a new opportunity for us to take and state our claim more solidly, more significantly, and more broadly than we have any time in the recent past. You've all been soldiers. You've literally been soldiers in this fight. We've made significant progress, but the idea we're still arguing over whether or not a caregiver who's a family member should be compensated, the idea we're still arguing over whether or not we fully fund ADA, the idea we're arguing over whether or not we should have strict enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act or IDEA, the idea we're not funding these things, and that's still a debate. I'll conclude by saying this and go to questions, because I want to talk about specifics, but the specifics you want to talk about. I would respectfully suggest to you that next time someone tells you we can't afford to do these things, remind them. I love my conservative Republican friends. They talk about the new paradigm all the time. Well, there's a new paradigm here. I remind you that it's been their outrageous spending habits and tax habits that have fundamentally altered our ability to fund the things that are so much more important. I can hardly wait as a Democratic nominee to debate my Republican opponents about their value system. I can hardly wait to have them explain to me why it is more important to give good and decent and honorable Americans, and they are, who make an average income of $1.4 million a year, an additional $85 billion tax cut, and it's not reasonable to spend $11 billion to make sure we fund the program we have here. That's not reasonable to fund Section 8. That it's not reasonable to spend the money on adequate housing. That's not reasonable to spend considerably less in meeting every single solitary goal we set out. Tell me your values. Which is more valuable? And beyond that, tell me, how will the nation benefit the most? Ladies and gentlemen, it's clear to me the way to do it. I'm anxious to hear your questions. Teddy, I'll cease and desist.